We're starting chapter 10 with a lesson on circles. So I have a circle drawn. The point in the middle of the circle would be known as the center. If you draw from that center to a point on the circle, that is called the radius, and that is how you measure a circle, by its length of its radius. If you have more than one of them, they are called radii. There's not radiuses. That doesn't exist. So more than one radius would be radii. If you have a segment that connects from one point on the circle to another point on the circle, the segment inside would be known as a chord. The longest chord in a circle goes from one side through the center to the other side. That is known as the diameter. You can also measure a circle by its diameter, because what do you suppose the relationship is between a radius and a diameter? Liam.
Yeah, radius is basically just half the diameter.
Yes, a radius is half the diameter. So radius is half the diameter. So let's just say that I had a radius that was 5 inches. What would the diameter be, Jacob? 10 inches. Well, let's go the other way. Let's say that I had a diameter that was 4 feet. What would the radius be? 2 feet. So if you know one, you can easily find the other. You take a radius times 2 to get the diameter. You take a diameter divided by 2 to get the radius. Questions about that? Andrew?
What if you're trying to find your radius and your diameter is an odd number?
So the diameter would be 9 feet. What would the radius be? Anybody know?
4.5.
Yeah, 4.5. Yep, 4.5 feet. That is correct. Questions about that? Okay, so we're gonna next talk about circumference. So circumference is the distance around a circle. A distance around a circle. Okay, circumference is the distance around a circle. Some call it perimeter. Have you ever heard of perimeter?
Yes.
What's a perimeter?
Outside measurement.
Outside measurement of a shape. Yes. So some compare it to perimeter. Some even call it perimeter, but it's really circumference. Circumference is a length that represents the distance around a circle. All right, so I'm going to clear all this out, and we're going to talk about circumference for a little bit. So a very long time ago, these mathematicians were sitting around and discussing all kinds of crazy things with math, because they didn't have smartphones and they didn't have Fortnite and all that crazy stuff. So they sat around and talked about educational things. Believe that. And one thing that they discovered is no matter how big or small a circle was, if they took their circumference and divided it by the diameter, it always came out to this number, 3.1415926, and it just kept going. It did not end. So they tried it with every circle that they could come across. every circle that they could come across, and they discovered that number was really, really important. They thought it was so important that they better assign it a symbol, and that's where pi came from. Okay, they discovered pi because pi is the ratio of a circumference divided by the diameter of the same circle. We are actually going to celebrate Pi Day when it rolls around, and we'll be able to tell what some of those dots are, because our contest, you will be studying the digits of pi. So they thought this was so important, circumference divided by diameter is pi. They used it to be able to figure out the circumference of any circle if they knew the diameter. Because if I look at this equation right here and I needed to solve for circumference, how do you undo a division? When we solved equations, what's the opposite? What did we do? Multiply. So if I would multiply both sides of this equation by diameter, that shows circumference is pi times the length of the diameter. That's how they derived the circumference formula. Somebody then said, oh, well, what if you don't know the diameter, you know the radius? Well, we know the relationship between diameters and radii, so I guess I need to add or 2 pi r, because if you know the radius, it's times 2 times pi. So pi times diameter, or 2 pi r. That's how you figure out the circumference of a circle. Now, when we use pi, we're obviously not going to use all those decimal places because it still has never ended. That's why it's an irrational number. So for us, for pi, you're going to use 3.14. That's the approximation that you will be told to use for pi. If you're dealing with fractions, they also use an approximation for pi as 22/7. So one or the other. Only if they don't tell you specifically to use 3.14, occasionally they might expect you to use the pi button. On that calculator that we are going to use for iLearn, it actually has a pi button. So just be aware if the directions say use 3.14, then obviously you got to use 3.14, okay? Rarely do they really want you to use the pi button. So let's look at this. We're going to do an example. Let me put another circle up here. So I'm going to give you this circle, and oops, I need to take that off there. Hold on. And we're going to do 10 feet. If they draw all the way across, we know that that's the diameter. So the circumference formula is pi times diameter. I'd recommend writing that so you can get it, so that you memorize it. Pi times diameter. And what did I just say we're going to use for pi?
3.14.
Yeah, 3.14. And you're going to take it times 10. So the circumference of that circle would be what? 31.4, and we would just say feet. 31.4 feet. Questions about that? All right, let's do another one. This time I'm going to give you a radius of 7 meters. A radius of 7 meters. How am I going to find the circumference? What formula am I going to use this time, Mason?
So you take the radius times 2.
You're going to go 2 pi r. Yeah, that's what yeah. So radius times 2 and then pi. So 2 times 3.14, and then we're going to plug in 7 for the radius. All right. If anybody's got their calculator pulled up, do you have your calculator pulled up?
No.
43.96. And we would say meters. Yep.
So you do 7 times 3.14 times 2.
Yes, or 2 times, either way, 2 times 3.14 times 7, yeah. All right, so we're going to do one like this where I have this circle and the diameter, okay, the diameter, we don't know, is D. But they tell me that the circumference is 37.68 feet. So how in the world could I figure out the diameter of that, Emily? Yeah, I'm going to start by writing this. Circumference is pi times diameter, and I'm going to plug in what I know. So instead of C, I'm going to put 37.68. For pi, we know 3.14, but we don't know D. Emily said we're going to divide by pi, so you're going to divide both sides by 3.14. And when I do that, I get 12. So we would label that 12 feet. What if they asked for the radius there? Then you would divide the diameter by 2. Huh? That one I solved for the diameter, yes. All right, questions about this? Does everybody have that written? Because I'm going to switch now to area. So circumference talks about the distance around. The area talks about the surface covered. And it has a little different formula. The area formula is pi times radius squared. So this one you got to use the radius. You can't use the diameter. If they give you the diameter, make sure you divide it by 2. And then there's one other thing we got to talk about, order of operations. So let's look at this one. I'm going to say on this one that my radius is 8 feet. So I've got to find the area. Area is pi times radius squared. So pi, of course we're using 3.14. Radius is 8, and it says 8 squared. So let's talk about order of operations, PEMDAS. So the parentheses there aren't the parentheses they talk about in PEMDAS. These parentheses mean multiplication. So we've gone through the P. What's the E stand for in PEMDAS? Exponents. So we have an exponent there, don't we? So it's going to be really important. I'm going to put a star. Make sure square the radius. Square radius before you multiply. Square the radius before multiplying. So it's going to be 3.14 times 64. So now I have to take 64 times 3.14, and it would be 200.96. Now, how do we label area? Does anybody know?
Isn't it squared?
It is square units. It is square units. You're telling how many squares fit in there. Square units, plus you're taking feet times feet right here. So feet times feet would be feet squared. You do square units. I'm going to do one more. I'm not going to erase it. I'm going to do one more. This time I'm going to give you this. and they want us to find the area. What measurement was given to us? The diameter, 10 inches diameter. So it says the diameter is 10 inches, but we need the radius. And again, what's the radius? Divide by 2, so 5 inches. And then use the formula. A equals pi r squared. So 3.14, 5 squared. And which part am I going to do first?
3.1
Exponent. So 3.14, what's 5 squared?
25.
25. And then we have to multiply 25 times 3.14. I get 78.5. And how would I label that? Inches squared. Questions about that?